get started with Unit 4 HL, Power, Places, and Networks. So the first thing that we're going to go over is going to be Chapter 1, which is going to be Global Interactions and Global Power. The term globalization is defined as the increasing interdependence of countries, which are looking specifically at economic, physical, socio-cultural, and political systems. For those who are unclear, interdependence refers to the connection and linking between other countries. And the three main views that we're looking at for these globalization indices are economic, social, and political. For economics, it is going to be the acceleration by the growth of the TNCs. Social, the impact of Western culture, art, media, sport, and other leisure activities around the world. Political, the growth of Western democracies and their influence on poor countries, or LICs, and the opening up of centralized economies. One of the most important globalization indices that you will learn is the KOF Index of Globalization. And the KOF Index looks at three main dimensions. First being the economic dimension, which is looking at the long distance flows of goods, capital, and services, as well as foreign direct investment, which we will talk more about later in this session. And the economic dimension covers 36% of this KOF index. Social is defined for the KOF index the spread of ideas, information, images, and people, international tourism, etc. And this covers 38% of the KOF index. Finally, the political dimension is the number of embassies in a country and membership of international organizations, which covers 26%. Next, we have two more other globalization indices. All right. The first one we have is the EY Globalization Index, which measures the 60 largest countries by GDP according to the level of globalization, which is measured through the index. And here it looks at the openness to trade, capital flows, exchange of technology and ideas, labor movements, and cultural integration. On the right here, we have a small map that is based on 2006 regarding the new globalization index, which looks more at the finance and trade politics as well as social integration perspective. And it also measures the distance of goods traded rather than the social count or the amount of people who were refugees to a country. So here we have the darker colors, meaning over 80 degrees. The higher the number, the higher degree of globalization in the new globalization index. And next we have global superpowers. So a global superpower is defined as countries that influence policy on an international scale, often in various world regions at the same time. And usually this may or may not include force as well. On the other hand, we have soft power, which is having the ability to change individuals, communities, and nations without using force or coercion. And this can be used through the influence by culture, political values, foreign policies such as aid and investment as well. A very popular instance for soft power examples is the Americanization from US, where it is a very popular destination for overseas students to study. And for the cultures of America, a lot of these students will bring on more of an assimilation perspective into the United States, meaning that they are more Americanized in a sort of way where they adapt to the American culture. Next, we look at the USA as a global superpower. Since the collapse of the USSR, the USA has become the only sole superpower left. However, in 2001, after the 9/11 attacks, the terrorist attacks, and the United States taking on war with Iraq and Afghanistan, unfortunately, as the consequences of the war, it became ex- extremely expensive and had more consequences on the United States as a superpower instead. And it made others look down on them more as losing the power as their status. And another piece of evidence that shows the Americas losing their superpower status is in 2008 regarding the financial crisis. The financial crisis uh, made the United States of America lose their economic strength as seen by other countries, and during this time, it also allowed other nations to gain or ascend in the economic perspective of having a superpower. However, things are changing with Trump's new America First nationalistic policy. However, which means that they will likely prioritize their own country first, meaning there will be a likely decline in other overseas commitments, such as providing military support in certain countries. Next is the American military presence. So the USA actually has a very large engineered advanced fleet of all sorts of military weapons, which allows them to essentially apply their force or some coercion into countries. For example, South Korea, there's a base of American soldiers, which also would be impacting the relationship between North and South Korea, as the U.S. also has a base in South Korea. So in South Korea, they are training the South Korean army, as well as supplying weapons and sharing tactics with each others. And in some way, they would be a coercion towards the South Korea, as they would be uh, providing them support in exchange for having a base in South Korea. However, on the rise is China. China has had a economic growth within the trade economy with numerous of the world's wealthiest countries, including their close relations with North Korea and Russia. As well, China should be known as the world number one leading exporter directly to the United States, with approximately 15% of their exports going to the United States itself. Their demand for raw materials caused the direct impact on the world market for other uh, minerals such as oil, iron ore, metals, petrochemicals, or just petrol, and machinery as well. Unfortunately, though, a third of China's population is employed in agriculture, and another third is employed in industries better known as factories, and those factories make up approximately 40% in China's GDP, which means that during this time, as they're mostly involved in agriculture and industries, China stays as the character of a NIC or newly industrial country, and not yet as a complete superpower. Next, we have our global organizations. First, we have the OECD, we actually have the G7 and G8. So originally it was the G7, which is a group of higher income countries, including the such following: United States, France, Germany, Italy, United Kingdom, Japan, and Canada. The reason why it's linked as plus Russia is because prior to the Russian-Ukraine war, Russia had been involved with the G7, creating a G8. However, during this time of war with Ukraine, the other 7 countries have decided to suspend Russia to be a part of that group. And as for the current G7 group, they are focusing on discussing certain matters, such as goals they plan to create together. But right now, it's more towards the global economy, governance, energy policy, and international security. However, critics also would like to appeal that the G7 does not necessarily speak for emerging NICs. However, they do have a similar outlook for the smaller proportion of the world's population. Next we have is the G20, which is an international grouping for the governments of the 20 largest and major economies around the world. And with the G20, in total, they make up approximately 85% of the world GDP combined, the world trade of about 80% of the economy, and finally, for population, in total making up approximately 65% of the world's population. G20 was officially established in 1999, and their primary goals are to discuss policy issues related to global financial instability, including the aging population, resource depletion, the reforming of the World Bank and IMF, which will be discussed later. And critics would like to mention here that the sub-Saharan African countries are underrepresented as the G20 group countries. Most of them have a high economic profile, which is the main reason why the G20 was formed. Now we're going on to the OECD and the OEEC. So the OECD stands for Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and there are currently 35 members as per the results in 2017. I'm unsure of the current participation of the OECD. Formerly, it was called the OEEC, as it was established to run the Marshall Plan for the reconstruction of Europe after World War II. For those who are unfamiliar with the Marshall Plan, it was essentially to rebuild Europe's financial economy, as well as rebuilding infrastructure and having their cities rebuilt as well after World War II. As for their goals, they look to restore confidence in global markets, and I should also specify that these goals are for the current setting, not from the OEEC, as OECD was officially formed in 1960 with the addition of the participation of the United States of America as well as Canada. As we're continuing on, another goal they have is to reestablish healthy public finances, fostering and supporting the sources of growth through innovation, as well as environmentally friendly strategies, such as green growth, to ensure that all ages can develop these skills while working productively. On the second side of our page is OPEC. The OPEC is essentially a type of oil cartel, which stands for Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. This OPEC group was formed in 1960, and the founding nations were the following: Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Most of these countries are in the Middle Eastern region, which are known to have high volumes of oil or oil-rich lands in that area. or region. And their goals originally to have the OPEC do is to tackle the oil price cuts by American and European oil companies. However, the OPEC has had a decline recently, as in 1979 they produced approximately 65% of the world's petroleum. However, in 2007 it took a major dip to 36% of the world's total petroleum produced. And this is the reason of following is because the older industrialized countries were having to develop alternative forms of energy or increase energy conservation in order to keep their countries going and earning profitable for petroleum gas to other countries as well. Next, we have the global lending institutions. First is the World Bank. The World Bank is the source of financial and technical assistance for LICs and NICs, and their goal is to fight poverty by providing resources, sharing knowledge, and building capacity. However, the critics of the World Bank claim that the free market reform policies are significantly harmful to economic development, and that it is only representative of 186 countries that it will be harmful against, as it is only run by a small number of rich countries. As for the IMF, International Monetary Fund, it is an international organization that oversees the global financial system and is funded by quota subscriptions, and specifically quota subscriptions being if a country being a member or would like to become a member of the IMF, they would have to pay something like a member fee or subscription in order to be a part of the IMF. And the IMF's goal is to provide advice and financial assistance to their struggling members. Again, the members can be a rich or a poor country. However, for the critics of the IMF, they would like to specify that despite the IMF being willing to loan out these funds, in exchange they do become a bit more demanding, telling a country how to run its economy or making a significant priority for the loan to be paid back as soon as possible. And finally, for the last global lending institution is the New Development Bank, which was established in 2014 by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which was originally called BRICS Development Bank. And the original plan for the development bank was to fund a infrastructure or technology project, development project from each member. And they would support any public or private projects through loans, guarantees, equity participation, as well as other financial instruments. And they have more of a focus towards infrastructure development as well as sustainable green development projects such as clean energy or green energy. However, despite the forming of the New Development Bank, critics have also rejected their progress, as many projects were discussed, however, no action was taken. In addition, there were also frozen negotiations with Russia as a result of the Ukraine war, meaning that Russia was unable to contribute to their funds in the New Development Bank as originally proposed. And also there was the lack of action due to geopolitical difficulties. And with the countries involved, both India and China are both facing border disputes. Meanwhile, China, Russia, and India are fighting a competition for dominance, And finally, South Africa is facing questionability for corruption. All right. So the next section we're going to talk about is global networks and flows. So first, we're going to talk about the growth of world trade and just some general patterns and statistics. So the materials, manufactured goods and services, the values of them between 2005 and 2015 doubled. However, faced a reduction between 2012 and 2014. North America, Europe, and Asia are known for majority of the trade as of 2017. However, it should also be stated that North America has a strong economy, Asia with a high population, Europe similar with the total countries forming a group for trade, specifically the EU. And as for the merchandise exports that were from newly industrial countries or NICs, increased between 33% to 40% from 2005 to 2015. As of 2015, the merchandise trade was worth over $16 trillion. And here we have some of the export and import statistics between China and the United States. Going over the exports of China, as China was said before, the leading exporter of many factory goods. So China's exports were approximately $2 trillion, while the U.S. imports were at $2.3 trillion in total, and this would be including China and other countries as well. As for imports, China only imports $1.7 trillion worth. However, the United States, they import about $2.3 trillion worth of merchandise, as many of the United States merchandise and products are made in China. Meanwhile, China's imports are mostly based off of their raw materials that they need for their factories to run. So next is the services. So services is going to be the developing countries' share in the commercial services account, which is approximately a third of global exports. And this is the reason due to the China, India, Hong Kong, and South Korea. And for the majority of these commercial services in the NICs and LICs, travel and tourism account for the majority of these services. So next is the international aid, loans, and debt relief. There are two important terms and vocabulary that you should know. First is top-down in terms of international aid, which is usually large-scale, government-funded, and usually done by foreigners or people outside of the area. Well-funded, as it should be for government funding. Usually, this would be examples such as emergency relief, where a big project is divided into small works, as if for example, the California fires, the United States government was able to provide emergency relief and aid to those who had to evacuate the area. Meanwhile, local fire departments had to separate and organize which area to support first. So that would be an example of top-down international aid. On the other hand, we have bottom-up international aid, which is usually small scale, labor intensive, run by locals or the local community members, limited funding, and an example of bottom-up international aid would be something like community gardening, where together in small efforts they work towards a common goal or larger project. And next we have is development aid. So in terms of development aid, majority of the donors are or sorry, it shouldn't be development, it should be international aid. Majority of those donors are HICs, and with the following, these 7 countries are the most significant donors in terms of international aid. First, we have United States of America and Japan, both contributing less than 0.25% of their GNI, also known as gross national income, and France and the United Kingdom coming in second by contributing less than 0.5% of their GNI. And finally, with the largest donors being the Scandinavian countries of Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, all three contributing over 0.5% of their gross national income. And majority of these international aid packages would be recipients of NICs and LICs, usually due to some sort of disaster or natural disasters. Excuse me. In terms of loans, in 1970, the OECD adopted the target for donors to spend at least 0.7% of their GNI on overseas development assistance, also known as ODA. And to specify what is a loan is a transfer of money or skills that require repayment over a set time. Especially in this circumstance, it would be more suitable in terms of speaking for these skills that are to be repaid. And next part here is debt relief. Most of the countries who are indebted are based in sub-Saharan Africa, and for the term here is HIPC, and HIPCs are heavily indebted poor countries. As of the 32 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, 25 out of 32 are listed as severely indebted. And as of 1962, the sub-Saharan African nations were owing approximately over $3 billion in debt. However, in 2017, it has obviously risen to a staggering amount of $230 billion, with the most significantly indebted state and country being Nigeria, being in debt of $35 billion. As for the critics of these type of debt relief programs, they claim that they do not necessarily help the poor nor the countries in debt, however, encouraging the countries to overspend instead. And the reason why that they say it's to encourage countries to overspend is an example of the country Tanzania. Tanzania decided to use the money to build schools instead, hoping to employ more teachers and also introducing it as free schooling to better their country. Alright, and next is the SAPs, or known as Structural Adjustment Programs. And essentially, they are loans from the IMF, again, will be discussed later, requiring that the borrowing country to cut these 4 mandatory conditions, which are to cut the government expenditure, cutting the state intervention in the economy, promoting liberalization, as well as promoting international trade. And this is to balance out the country's portfolio, more to increase more foreign exchange in terms of recognition, as well as opening up their trade economy. And the requirements before of accepting these SAPs are to that the borrowing country must make greater use of their country's resources, having a social and economic reformation of the economic side of things of the country in order to make it more efficient, having a diversification of the economy and having an increased trade to earn various types of foreign exchange. And this can also result as a reduction in the role of state within the economy as well. Next, we have remittances. And just as a refresher, remittances go directly to migrants or immigrants' families or households rather than going through the government or bank for whatever they may choose to spend their remittance monies from. And the global trend with remittances is that many of the world migrants will travel from the poorer to richer countries, usually from Southeast Asia to the Middle East, as there is a boom in construction, a increased demand for domestic servants or helpers, as well as employment in the oil economy. And the most significant flow for remittances are between Mexico and the United States, with the United States sending 120.16 billion over the course of 1 year worth of remittances. And as for just some quick facts, there are approximately a quarter of Haiti's GDP is made from remittances, and Philippines bring approximately $28 billion worth of income, which is resulted approximately 13% of the country's GDP. And in terms of value, approximately 1% of the China's GDP and 3% of India's GDP are the leading two recipients for the value dollar amount. Alright, and next we have illegal flows and counterfeits. So first, illegal flows include the following, such as trafficked people, drugs, counterfeit food and drinks, fraudulent medicines, and counterfeit goods. In between 2012 and 2014, there were over 63,251 victims of human trafficking, with 60% of those cases being international, less than 30% being interregional, and of those who were taken away as victims of trafficking, usually result in the poor countries to be exploited into the richer countries, such as being sex slaves. And the approximation for the global drug trade is worth approximately $300 billion, or approximately 1% of the total world GDP. And for the example here, I don't have a chart pulled up, but if you look in the Oxford Study Guide in 2017, there is a flowchart there that shows that majority of cocaine is produced in Europe or the United States and then distributed to other countries. And on the other side here, we have more of the fraudulent and counterfeit. So counterfeit goods. The counterfeit goods economy is worth approximately $250 billion per year. And counterfeit goods are responsible for the direct exploitation of labor, the environmental damages, health implications as well. And counterfeit goods ultimately does reduce tax revenues for governments, which means that they would have to raise costs for enforcement, surveillance, as well as general food and drink. Those prices will go up as counterfeit goods do directly impact those real, authentic goods. As for the counterfeit food and drink, there was only one example I was able to find, which was the 2013 horse meat scandal, where essentially in the EU, some products that said there were beef products inside was in fact horse meat instead of beef. As for finally, we have fraudulent medicines, which make up approximately $5 billion per year for their economy, with most of the trades of these fraudulent medicines going between East Asia to the Pacific side of North America, or vice versa, as well as Southeast Asia to Africa. And based on some statistics, about 1% of medicines in HICs are fraudulent or fake. As in LICs, there were 30% of medications were fraudulent. And worst of all is in Africa and East Asia, there were over a third of the malaria medicines and treatments that were fraudulent, meaning they were likely ineffective. Alright, so we're going to go on to the next page. And just before I go on and continue, I'm just going to look in the chat if there's any questions. So yes, there was a Unit 3 session that have already been held. It has been uploaded into the M25 Geography channel. If you would like to take a look at it, it should be in the pinned comments. And the other one, US is still seen as one of the biggest superpowers. That is true. And yes, so in terms of the events that were referred, such as the recession, as well as the war conflicts, those expenses, yes, those are smaller drawbacks. However, at this time, I believe approximately the US and China are similar in terms of superpower. However, when compared, the US does have more significance due to the Americanization, as previously mentioned, where many students who attend American schools for university or as international students do tend to assimilate more towards the American culture, thus having the soft power of cultural impacts. The America still remains as a superpower. Yes. Where is the M25 Geo channel? So you should be able to find the revision join channel up in your menu bar, and you can select geography. It should be here. Let me just link it here. I will link it in chat. I'm not sure if you will be able to access it though. Yeah, but the M25 Geography channel should be accessible via the revision host, or sorry, the revision join channel, where you can join whichever subject interests you. Does anyone have any questions so far? Alright, just give me 1 second. Okay. Hopefully, Lemon Saver, you're able to see that last link there. That one's the revision join. You should be able to access the other Unit 1, 2, and 3, as well as this current one, which will be uploaded shortly after this session. So next, we're going to go over the FDI, which are considered foreign direct investments. And the other side of our slide here are the TNCs. So the foreign direct investments is essentially a investment by a company from into the structures, equipment, organizations of a foreign countries, essentially investment into another country in different currencies. In terms of the FDI, the investments fell during the 2008 financial crisis as a result of the American failure during the stock market. However, it did improve in 2015, reaching a all-time high. I believe 2017 again was the time that this book was written. Unsure of the actual highest point now. With Asia currently focusing their FDI investments in the newer income, the newly industrialized countries as well as lower income countries such as Africa, Latin America, and Caribbean. They have seen less FDI investments. As for Asia's FDI investments in NICs and LICs, mostly are, for example, located in Vietnam or in Southeast Asia. Despite the Caribbean and Latin America having less FDI investments, there's an exception to Cuba, as they had continued better ties with the United States, which is expected for their FDI to increase. As for the TNCs are to so the research and development, also known as R&D, and decision making are usually located in the growth areas of HICs. Usually, the central of the CBD, Central Business District of the country or city, and their assemblies are usually located in LICs and NICs due to the cheaper labor and much more cheaper for them to afford in terms of assembly. And the case study that we have here is the Tata Group, which is the largest steel maker in India, founded in 1868. And they created the India's first their first steel plant, and created three main characteristics of their what they pride themselves to be the greatest institution created, which was the Tata Memorial Hospital. And these three characteristics are loyalty, dignity, and now what is called CSR, or corporate social responsibility, which essentially is what is in the best interest of the society. And they came up with something called frugal innovation, which are basically creating new products to be affordable to those who may be lower class or poor, as well as to those to the rising middle class for affordability. Meanwhile, having the same effect as a new product. And the example of the frugal innovation is the Tata Nano, which is a 2,300 United States dollar car. As well, the other example would be something like a cheap water filter that they made from rice husks. Alright, and we have our last section here, which will be human and physical influences on global interactions. So, MGOs and trading blocks. Please do ask questions if you are confused with the trading blocks. It is usually a very confusing topic within the HL Unit 4. So MGOs are also called multi-government organizations, which operate across a number of different states or countries, usually coming towards a common goal. However, nowadays most appear to be focusing on economic matters in an attempt to increase trade as well as interactions. Next is trading blocks. So, trading blocks are a arrangement between countries to allow free trade between member countries. However, uh, however, they may impose tariffs on external countries who may decide to trade with them. As for the four main trading blocks, for free trade areas, not to be confused with free trade zones, free trade areas are essentially where members of the free trade agreement will abolish tariffs and quotas on trade between the member nations. However, they will usually restrict the imports from non member countries. And a great example of free trade area is NAFTA, also known as the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was made in uh, it was signed in 1992 but put in effect in 1994 between all three major countries of North America: Canada, United States, and Mexico. And as for the free trade areas, usually when bringing goods across the border, border checks are conducted to check the origin of goods in order to pay the duty and taxes attached to those goods. And the second trading bloc are customs unions, which are a closer form of economic cooperation, free trade between members. However, they impose tariffs on external countries. And here, for customs unions, all the external countries they will be applied the same tariffs as set between. For example, this would be a good example of EU, where the EU would set no matter which country you came from, you would pay the exact same tariff, no matter which country you came in from, whether it be Italy or France. They would pay the same amount of tariff. On the other hand, you have common markets, and common markets are custom unions, which allow the movement of people and capital in addition to goods and services. Essentially, it would be similar to customs unions. However, you are allowed to move between uh, the addition of goods and services. And the example would be the EU single market, where EU citizens can go through other EU countries without necessarily having a visa. May offer their services in another EU country, or they may invest in another country. However, if it's a EU to EU country, there are usually no tariffs nor custom checks for duty, as usually those products are declared. As for the last one, the economic unions are a group of nations that allow free trade and free movement of people and capital. However, they do require members to have certain common policies with certain sectors. And again, example of the European Union. European Union, they are allowed to essentially have free trade movement of people and capital. However, they do have following similar laws, such as certain sectors like trade, agriculture, as well as environment and pollution. There may be a penalty for each country that is set by the EU. And this would be an example of a sustainable practice as well, if they're looking to control population or pollution in the European Union. Any questions here? Okay. All right. So next here, as I previously mentioned, is the difference between free trade zones and free trade areas. As well, we'll be talking about the export processing zones. So export processing zones are also known as EPZs, and they are areas that specialize in manufacturing industrial and commercial goods purely for the intention of exporting them. And EPZs are areas that are used to attract foreign investors, partners, and buyers for FDI or the foreign investment. And free trade zones are areas where goods can be stored, manufactured, or re exported without customs, duties, and taxes. Essentially, without the long, complicated definition, EPZs are factories that export everything. Meanwhile, FTZs are trade zones, storage, and sometimes assembly lines. And again, as mentioned for EPZs, they are popular just to attract foreign investors and buyers for their FDI. However, as for the FTZs and EPZs being popular for LICs and NICs, is due to their relationship with high income countries due to the shortages of foreign exchange since the 1980s. And to go over the types of EPZs and FTZs as for examples, I've linked here below. Shenzhen, China is a tech megacity, or EPZ in this circumstance, as well as Dhaka, Bangladesh, which is a EPZ that specializes in manufacturing garments. As for free trade zones, the Hong Kong Free Port is known to be trade friendly with little to no duties on imports nor exports. Alright, economic migration. So there are four main points in terms of economic migration, and many of which we have decided to hold it off for the Mexico consideration between the immigrants. So the migration is becoming more global and diverse in terms of the different types of origins where migrants are coming from. Considering that this is in the perspective of the United States, and there are more migrants in all of the major regions. So this might not just be the United States; it could be Canada, United States, or any larger country, including China. And diversified migration, there are more diversity in terms of why people may choose to immigrate or migrate, such as maybe being refugees, having an opportunity for being a skilled labor. They may be trafficking victims or economic migrant in the case that they may not be able to afford school or education, as well as arranged marriage. And I've attached below, more women are migrating, therefore there have been preventive measures taken as well for this event. And a good example would be for the trends of migration is that it is difficult for the government to provide services as well as restrict the migrations for their countries. Specifically here we're discussing in between the US and Mexico. And next we have a case study from migration control in the United States, where it states over 12 million illegal immigrants are currently located in the United States, most having overstayed visas, which from their statistics show that they are likely more educated or financially stable, while the other chance would be evading immigration or border patrol, which has now become more strict for all international students as well. As for the case study in the 2017, there was a U.S.-Mexico wall proposed by Mr. President Donald Trump in order to minimize and restrict the number of migrations from Mexico into U.S. As he would state, there are too many people coming in for the American dream, which was the reason why he set up this wall to restrict migrations. And as for the current statistics, there are definitely illegally trafficked women from underdeveloped countries who may be willing to pay to be trafficked into the United States. And those may include the following countries' women: Indian, Russian, Thai, or Chinese women. Many may be admitted to be going to a study or some type of education. However, many may end up being exploited and becoming sex slaves instead. All right, and here we're nearing the end. Shrinking world and digitalization. And digitalization is allowing us to drive down the cost for cross-border communications and transactions, as it allows businesses and small enterprises to connect digitally. As for the smaller enterprises, many are able to compete on the global market as data are able to be transmitted and tracked online, allowing countries and companies to connect to their individuals as the container ships or flight packages may be tracked digitally. In terms of the digitalization, e-commerce represents approximately 13% of the global goods trade, with Meta, formerly Facebook, stating that they have over 50 million small and medium businesses on their platform, which also does prove that the point of the internet does allow us to communicate as well as connect with each other's more, as many digital platforms now offer or allow companies to reach out further than their local market, such as WhatsApp business accounts, Facebook marketplace, Instagram business, or even Amazon as well. However, unfortunately, in the digitalization, not everyone will benefit from the shrinking world, such as China, North Korea, and Russia's heavy censorship, hiding their personal opinions as well as the world's opinions about their countries away from their own population, which means that they may not have direct access to the internet. Transport developments. So, in transport developments, the two terms that you should be careful of is frictional effect of distance as well as distance decay, and this defines as the areas that are close together are more likely to interact with each other as opposed to countries that are further away. As for the next part here, development in the informational and communicational technology, also known as ICT, bring parts of the world together almost instantaneously. And examples of this would be such as the instance of the time of Queen Elizabeth II's passing. It was immediately broadcasted on TVs, social media. Everyone's phone started ringing almost at the same time, and everyone in the world who had access to the internet was able to find out this piece of news almost all together at the same time. And as for the definition of time space compression, it is the idea that the world feels smaller due to faster communication and transportation. Some examples would include planes, high speed rail, as well as internet. In terms of the containers and jet engines, container shipping has been vital to the global economy since the 1950s. However, currently, there are larger container ships that are able to carry up to 24,000 containers at a time, which allow for larger volumes of goods to be transported between countries quickly and easily. Not really sure about the quickly part, but definitely easily, as most of the items or products are just shoved into a container to be shipped off. And the next is the jet engine, and it is considered one of the most significant innovations in long distance transports. Um, as well, it is safe, easy to maintain, and fuel efficient compared to the old fashioned propeller. And it allowed for more people to travel easily between countries, especially in, I believe, in the year 1960s, where the Boeing 747s came out, allowing each other to travel more freely. All right, and then we have trends in communication infrastructure. So ICT, as mentioned before, would be it would be the communication technology development, and they bring faster processing speed as their new tech advances. And in terms of statistics, there are 1.8 billion people who will move to the global consumer class, which are people who spend $12 plus a day. And at this time, most will have access to their smartphones. And for mobile phones, if they do have access to mobile smartphones, it will allow them to have better access to healthcare, such as in the example and case study of Bangladesh, where 90% of births occur outside of hospitals. If they had an access to a cell phone, perhaps they would be able to access educational courses to healthcare via the internet, which would be available for most mature subject matters as well as ages. All right, natural resource availability. So the countries with the natural resources are more globally interactive in terms of looking for other types of diversity for their portfolio. As well, there are some countries who may be resource rich. Um, Sorry for the typo. However, they may be cash poor, like the DRC of Congo in Africa, where over it is expected to have over $24 trillion worth of natural resources, specifically large deposits of cobalt in their ground or their caves. And there's also a term called commodity dependence, where countries heavily rely on a single source of their commodity to make money, such as in Ghana and their relationship with coca exports. And having only been relying on one or very small chance of university, it the crop is sus- very susceptible to extreme weathers, disease, and insects infestation. However, the countries with rich resources have decided to exploit and export most of their gasoline in their trunks. And as for this, uh, for the ones that exploited and exported their resources, including South Africa, Canada, and Australia. On the other hand, MICs and LICs, who were rich in raw materials, like Brazil and South Africa, they used those profits from their exports to develop their house as well as financial plans in the future. And in terms here, diversifying their global interactions may include a shift from relying on an expert of natural resources to give them, and to rather stay curious and competitive, as well as globally connected through the services of the public library. Right, and then as for the HICs, UK and Germany, they have exported the bulk of their natural resources and have since been forced to diversify their portfolio. Alright, And finally, here we have geographical isolation, where there is a essentially there's a barrier when a country is isolated from other global interactions. Usually, this would involve something like landlocked countries, such here as South Sudan or Singapore, um, Switzerland. Those are all uh, landlocked countries. Sorry. So yes, this recording is started at around an hour ago. Just wrapping up here. And for the example of South Sudan here, I do apologize that the map is quite small. So South Sudan, obviously the Red Sea is up here, as well Indian Ocean's over here. They are landlocked countries surrounded on all sides, in which they would have to probably pay tariffs or some type of money to either Sudan or some other countries down here, in order to export their goods to the sea or the Indian Ocean, allowing them for trade. As well, their time used to bring it to these countries who will bring it to the ocean side, as well as the cost of transport, do ultimately cause the limitation of the flows of knowledge, impacting product innovation as well as any ideas of innovative materials. And finally, we have Singapore. Singapore, thankfully, does not actually have much of a geographical isolation. However, sorry, it's actually separated at the northern line of or the coastline of Singapore to go into Malaysia. And therefore it's not significantly landlocked, as they do have a good amount of water surrounding about 3/4 of their country. And in Singapore, their ports are actually located on the Malay at the tippy end of Malay Peninsula, as well as the entrance of the passage here highlighted in red. And just more closer here, this one here is going to be the Singapore, which again they give a natural stopover for ships and provide a hub for global ocean trade. And that is it for Unit 4 HL. Does anyone have any other questions before I end this session today?